Baker, I basically read your entire piece in the 6 o'clock hour. I won't repeat it. I will say, though, I'm saying this the same reason I talked about the immunity case, because there's this sort of there's just this massive sense of overconfidence by a lot of Republicans and a lot of people around Donald Trump about the landslide victory that was a 1.5% victory, about an immunity case that actually the Supreme Court had holes in that of presidential immunity that future Supreme Courts can drive Mack trucks through, and also about how horrible, I read Jerry Baker's piece and the part where he was talking about Donald Trump needing to work for all Americans. But there was another part of the piece where he talked about Joe Biden's terrible legacy. And I know Jerry, like him, very much respect him, but it's just laughable that there are people out there that actually, I don't know. I guess, I don't know. It's an alternative reality that they live in. I mean, as you write here, for the first time since George W. Bush's transition 24 years ago, America is at peace overseas on Inauguration Day. Murders are way down. Illegal immigration at the southern border, lower than it was even when Donald Trump was in office. Stock markets at record high and finished their best 2 years in 25 years. Jobs way up, wages rising, the economy growing fast. Unemployment is as low as it was before COVID-19 and near its historic best. Drill, baby, drill. We already are. Domestic energy production higher than it has ever been. The manufacturing sector has more jobs today than at any time since the turn of the century. Drug overdoses continue to drop. Crime, Peter, is at a 50-year low. Violent crime is at a 50-year low. And the economy, if you talk to people all across the world, if you talk to bankers, if you talk to investors, if you talk to business people across the world, in Europe, as I've done over the past month, I'm sure you do all the time in your reporting, they will tell you America is the envy of the world. America's economy stands apart. There's not a close second. You talk to military leaders across the world, they will tell you America's military is stronger than any military. There's not a close second. The closest second place country in terms of military power right now is getting hammered by Ukraine. So, again, I understand people have their feelings, people have their emotions, but the facts you laid out, well, they're actually just the facts of where America stands. And I do wonder, how do Republicans look compared to that 4 years from now, 8 years from now?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. I mean, look, our friend, mutual friend John Meacham would be able to tell us, of course, which president inherited a better situation, but it's hard to think of one. If I look back at what Ronald Reagan inherited, what Bill Clinton inherited, what even George W. Bush inherited, certainly Barack Obama, with the crisis, the financial crisis, any of them would have really killed for an economy that's doing as well as this one is, and for a situation in the world that is advantageous to America as the one we have right now. That doesn't mean there are not problems. Obviously, there are. There always are. And not everybody's always feeling it. But the bigger question is, why is there such a disconnect between those numbers and the way a lot of Americans feel, right? Americans are very sour about the way the country is going right now. For all of those numbers you just read, it doesn't seem to permeate at least a certain part of the population. The polls show that only 19% of Americans think that the country is on the right track right now. That's not just Trump supporters, obviously. That includes a lot of Biden and Harris supporters as well. So there's a sourness in the country right now. There's a sense that they don't feel the benefits of they don't feel the benefits in their life, or they don't see it, or they live in a media ecosphere which maybe amplifies Donald Trump's message, which is pretty dystopian.
And Mike Barnicle, that's the thing. Again, for a campaign that ran in 2020 saying F your feelings. I mean, they printed flags that said F your feelings, vote Donald Trump. It's been all about feelings. Yeah, we lost the election, but you know what? He just give him time. You need to give him some space so get his feelings in line. You look at what's happening now. You talk about all of these numbers. You go, yeah, but people just think. Okay, the economy is the envy of the world. Okay, we're drilling more oil than ever before. Okay, the United States stock market is higher than ever before. Okay, people's retirement accounts are higher and more packed than they've ever been. But, you know, and this goes to even those rich guys driving their Maseratis to the country club with their "Don't Tread on Me" license plates, because they're so tread on, because while they're golfing, they're making millions of dollars on the stock market passively while people are working their asses off, around the rest of the world. But don't tread on me. Their feelings. It just doesn't feel right. What are we, a nation of feelings now, where the facts don't matter and it's feelings because something you saw on Twitter? I mean, that is, again, that's the madness of it all, is you've got all of these numbers, but people are just not feeling right. And I'm not talking about middle-class workers and working-class workers that are struggling with their grocery bills. I'm talking about everybody. I'm talking about the people that are richer today than they've ever been before, tech bros who are billionaires many times over, that are talking about the socialist Joe Biden, because he hurt their feelings somehow.
You know, Joe, there's so much that you packed into those observations that you just made. I have no answer for it, but the country is in sort of a maudlin mood, has been for some time. I think there's a lot that went into it, and historically over the past decade, 2 decades, whatever. I think COVID had a lot to do with it. I think kids being out of school for nearly a year and lack of socialization on their part has something to do with it. The cost of groceries has something to do with it. But at the end of the day, Peter Baker, I want to ask you this question. Do you think, two things, a two-part question. Do you think Donald Trump has successfully exhausted both the American public and the American media? And two, do you think the American media's coverage of Joe Biden over the past 2 years has also added to this sense of malaise in this country? And by media coverage, I mean no matter what legislation was passed in the first 2 years of his administration, the disaster of the Afghanistan withdrawal, everyone understands that. The loss of 13 American Marines there, everyone understands that. But nearly every piece since then tells the American readers and viewers how old Joe Biden is, when everybody knows how old he is, and raises the questions about his mental acuity, when no one of any reputation, I think, has gone on record and said, yeah, here's why we worry about his mental acuity, because he forgot Ralph's name the other day, something like that. Do you think that package has anything to do with the mood of the country today?
Well, I mean, to your first question, yes, I think everybody's exhausted. And I think that's why a lot of people are kind of tuning out or checking out of politics for the moment. It's kind of a break. My guess is everybody comes back because a lot of important things are at stake. And once President-elect Trump takes office, people will want to know what's going on and support or oppose it as they feel fit. On the second question, you know, I get it. I understand that. I certainly hear that from my, from some of our readers and some of our critics. I think we're in a different atmosphere, though, a different media ecosphere than we used to be. It's kind of a choose your news moment where, the numbers that we put in the story, we published all of them before the election. People say, how come you didn't do it before the election? We did. We published all those numbers. All those facts were known to readers. But you're right that Biden's age was an issue. And you hear a lot of Democrats say that that's a lost opportunity. It's the media's fault. I'm sure a lot of people will think so. But maybe also Biden has some responsibility, knowing that he was not able to command the stage, even if he's able to make rational and good decisions, as his aides insist that he still is, regardless of his age. Clearly, there was an issue in terms of his ability to present to the public and to be commanding on stage. We saw that very vividly in June of this year. And the fact that he chose to stay in the race, to run again, even though he knew he would be 86 at the end of a second term, froze the Democratic Party behind him in a way that many of them were uncomfortable and wish he had stepped aside earlier so they could have developed a new generation of leadership before 107 days for the election. So, okay, media, sure, absolutely. Perhaps the president has some responsibility there as well.
Chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, Peter Baker. Peter's piece is up now, nytimes.com. Peter, thanks so much, as always.